Somewhere above the clouds in Hunan province, on a narrow mountain road called the Tongtian Avenue, a small white camper van is inching around a hairpin bend with a drop of several hundred meters just past the guardrail. Behind the wheel is a 68-year-old retired factory worker we'll call Mr. Zhang. His wife sits beside him with a thermos of tea, completely calm. This is bend number 43 of 99, and they have 56 more to go before dark. But they are not lost, and this is not a day trip. This van is their home, and they are far from alone. So the obvious question is, why? To understand what's happening on these mountain roads, you first have to understand what's happening in China's cities. In China, most men retire at 60, and many women retire as early as 55. That means a healthy person can finish their working life with 20 or even 30 good years still ahead of them, a modest but steady pension arriving every month, and an apartment in a city like Chengdu or Zhengzhou that is worth more than everything else they own combined. For decades, the standard script was simple. You retired, you helped raise your grandchildren, you played cards in the neighborhood park, and you stayed put. But over the last 10 years, something changed. Motorhome ownership in China exploded from almost nothing to hundreds of thousands of registered vehicles, with sales climbing every single year. RV manufacturing towns sprang up in Shandong province, building everything from compact vans to full-size land yachts. Camping apps and WeChat groups for traveling retirees grew into communities with millions of members. And on Chinese video platforms like Douyin, some of the most followed travel creators are not 25-year-old influencers. They are gray-haired couples in their 60s filming themselves cooking noodles at the edge of the Gobi Desert. The Chinese internet gave this generation a nickname, the silver-haired drifters. The roads they choose to drift on are unlike anything else on the planet, and later we'll get to the part almost nobody believes, which is what this entire life actually costs. But first, the roads. Take the road where we started, the Tongtian Avenue on Tianmen Mountain. It climbs about 11 kilometers up a nearly vertical mountainside through 99 hairpin turns, a number chosen deliberately because in Chinese tradition, heaven has 99 palaces. The road ends near a natural arch in the mountain called Heaven's Gate, a hole punched clean through the rock face, so large that stunt pilots have actually flown small aircraft through it. From the valley floor, the road looks like a ribbon someone dropped down the cliff. Building it took 8 years. Driving it in a 2.5-ton camper van takes nerve, low gears, and total trust in your brakes. However, Tianmen Mountain is almost a warm-up compared to what came before it, because the most famous impossible road in China wasn't built by the government at all. It was carved by hand by 13 farmers. High in the Taihang Mountains of Henan province sits a village called Guoliang. For centuries, the only way in or out was a staircase of about 700 stone steps cut into a sheer cliff, known locally as the Sky Ladder. If someone in the village got seriously ill, they had to be carried down those steps on a person's back. In 1972, the villagers decided they'd had enough. 13 men sold goats and herbs to buy hammers, chisels, and steel drill rods, and they started cutting a tunnel directly through the cliff face. They had no engineering degrees, no heavy machinery, and no outside funding. They worked by hand, meter by meter, for 5 years. One of them died during the construction. In 1977, they broke through and the Guoliang Tunnel opened, roughly 1.2 kilometers of rough-hewn passage running inside the cliff, with 30 windows carved through the rock wall so light spills in and drivers can look straight down the precipice beside them. Today, van lifers make pilgrimages to that tunnel. They drive slowly through the uneven stone corridor, headlights sweeping over chisel marks that are now more than 50 years old, and they park their campers in the village above it. Ask them why they came, and many say the same thing. If 13 farmers could carve a road through a mountain with hand tools, the least we can do is drive it. But hand-carved tunnels and cliffside switchbacks are only the beginning, because the real test for China's van travelers lies much further west, in places where the road itself is the easy part. In the far northwest, in Xinjiang, There's a highway called the Duku, running about 560 kilometers straight across the Tianmen Mountains, the mountains of heaven. In a single day's drive, the Duku Highway takes you from baking desert at the bottom, up through green alpine meadows full of grazing horses, past glaciers and ice fields, and back down through red rock canyons on the other side. Travelers call it 4 seasons in one day, and they are not exaggerating. The highway is so high and so exposed that snow makes it impassable for most of the year. It opens around June and closes by October, 5 months. That's the entire window. The Duku was built by soldiers of the People's Liberation Army over 9 years in the 1970s and 1980s, and it came at a terrible price. By official accounts, 168 soldiers died during its construction, many of them buried in avalanches. There's a martyrs' cemetery along the route at Shawarma, and it has become a tradition among Chinese van travelers to stop there, leave cigarettes or fruit on the graves, and thank the young men who never got to grow old for the road that lets them feel young again. Every summer, when the Duku opens, a convoy of motorhomes forms almost immediately. Retired couples, families on long leave, solo drivers in converted delivery vans. They crawl over passes at more than 3,000 meters, park for the night beside alpine lakes with the Tian Shan glaciers glowing above them, and wake up to horses walking past their windows. Having survived the mountains, many of them point their vans south towards something even stranger, a road with no mountains at all. The Taklamakan Desert is one of the most hostile places on Earth. Its name is often translated as the place you enter but never leave. It's a sea of shifting sand dunes the size of Germany, where summer surface temperatures can cook past 60 degrees Celsius and sandstorms can swallow the horizon in minutes. And running straight through the middle of it, for over 550 kilometers, is a paved 2-lane highway. The Tarim Desert Highway shouldn't be able to exist. Sand dunes move, and any normal road would be buried within a couple of years. So Chinese engineers did something remarkable. They planted a forest in the desert. Along both sides of the highway runs a green belt of drought-resistant shrubs and trees, tens of meters wide, stretching the entire length of the road, kept alive by drip irrigation fed from wells drilled deep into salty groundwater. And for decades, spaced every 4 kilometers or so along the highway, stood small blue-roofed well houses, each one staffed year-round, often by a married couple, whose entire job was to maintain the pumps and keep that thin green line alive. More than 100 of these little stations, holding back an entire desert, 2 people at a time. In recent years, many of the pumps have been converted to run on solar power, but the green wall they protect is still what stands between the highway and burial. Van travelers describe driving the Taklamakan as the closest thing to crossing an ocean by land. Hour after hour of golden dunes rolling to the horizon in every direction, the only signs of life being the irrigation belt beside the asphalt and the occasional oncoming truck. They stop at the marker at the desert's heart, take a photo, refill their water tanks, and keep going. At night, they park between the dunes, and with zero light pollution for hundreds of kilometers, the Milky Way comes down almost to the sand. Now, at this point, you might assume these travelers are wealthy adventurers with money to burn. The reality inside these vans tells a completely different story. A basic Chinese-built camper van, the kind based on a light truck or delivery van chassis, costs somewhere between $100,000 and $300,000 yuan, roughly $15,000 to $45,000. Larger motorhomes run higher, but even those are often cheaper than a single parking space in downtown Shanghai, which has genuinely sold for more than some of these vehicles. Many retirees fund the purchase by renting out their city apartment, which alone can cover fuel, food, and campsite fees with money left over. Others simply sold up entirely. Step inside one of these vans and you'll find a life that is small but complete. A bed above the cab or across the back, a 2-burner induction cooker where the same dishes that came out of a city kitchen for 40 years still appear every day, dumplings, stir-fried greens, a pot of congee in the morning. There's a fold-out table, water tanks under the floor, solar panels on the roof, and a diesel heater the size of a shoebox that keeps the cabin warm at 4,000 meters. And somewhere near the door, almost always, sits a folding stool and a thermos, because the day begins the same way it did back home, with tea. The rhythm of the road settles in quickly. Drive in the morning when the light is good and the passes are clear. Stop by early afternoon. Walk, cook, and talk to the neighbors, because there are always neighbors. Chinese van travelers rarely move alone. They form loose convoys through WeChat groups, 5 or 6 vans traveling together, sharing fuel stops and weather warnings, and when one van breaks down on a mountain grade, the others pull over and wait. At the bigger campsites, the evenings look like the neighborhood park picked itself up and moved to the edge of a glacier, folding chairs in a circle, a speaker playing old songs, square dancing on the gravel, mahjong under an awning, and grandchildren visiting for the summer holidays, chasing each other between the vehicles. And once you're on the road in China, life is astonishingly cheap. Public rest areas allow overnight parking. Scenic area lots often charge just a few yuan. Purpose-built RV campsites with power and water have multiplied across the country, and wild camping beside a lake in Qinghai or a grassland in Inner Mongolia costs exactly nothing. The life even has its own seasons. When winter closes the Duku and buries the high passes, the vans flow south like migrating birds, down to the palm-lined coast of Hainan Island and the warm valleys of Yunnan, where beachside parking lots fill up with northern license plates from November to March. Locals have a name for these winter arrivals, the snowbirds. Then spring opens the mountains again, and the whole tide turns around and heads north. Add it all up, and couples routinely report full monthly budgets of 4,000 to 6,000 yuan, under $1,000, for a life that includes glaciers, deserts, and rainbow-colored mountains outside the windshield. If stories like this are your kind of thing, take a second and hit subscribe, because roads like these are exactly what this channel is about. Now, about those rainbow mountains. They're real. In Gansu province, at Zhangye-Dangxia, entire hillsides ripple in bands of red, orange, yellow, and cream, mineral layers laid down over millions of years and tilted upward like a painted staircase. Camper vans line up at the park entrance at dawn, because the colors are richest in low sunlight after rain. First-time visitors regularly say the same sentence, which is that it doesn't look real. That's the phrase that follows these travelers everywhere. The stone forests of Yunnan, the karst towers rising out of the rice fields around Guilin, the sandstone pillars of Zhangjiajie that inspired the floating mountains in the movie Avatar. None of it looks real, and all of it is reachable by van. But there's a hierarchy among China's road travelers, and everyone knows what sits at the top. The G318, the Sichuan-Tibet Highway. The G318 runs from Shanghai all the way to the Nepal border, but the stretch that matters is the final 2,000 kilometers or so, from Chengdu to Lhasa. Chinese drivers call it the Road of Dreams, and it earns the name the hard way. From the moment you leave the Sichuan Basin, the highway begins climbing, and it essentially never stops. It crosses more than a dozen mountain passes, many of them above 4,000 meters, with the highest points pushing past 5,000. It drops into gorges cut by the Yangtze, the Mekong, and the Salween rivers, then climbs straight back out the other side. One infamous section near the town of Basu, known as the 72 Turns, descends nearly 2,000 vertical meters in a single wall of stacked switchbacks that looks, from above, like someone crumpled the road and threw it at the mountain. This is where the journey stops being scenic and starts being a genuine trial. Above 4,000 meters, the air holds barely 60% of the oxygen you get at sea level. Travelers wake at 2 in the morning with pounding headaches. Diesel engines lose power and gasp on the grades. Weather changes without warning, and a sunny afternoon can turn into a whiteout on a pass with no shoulder and a 1,000-meter drop. Vans break down in places where the nearest mechanic is a day's drive away. Every year, some travelers are forced to turn back, defeated by altitude sickness or mechanical failure or plain fear. And yet the flow of vans toward Lhasa never stops. This is the part that stays with you. A striking share of the drivers grinding up those passes are past retirement age. There are documented cases of drivers in their 70s and even their 80s completing the route, sometimes towing a small oxygen concentrator, sometimes with a grandchild along for the summer. When journalists ask them why they'd risk it, the answers are rarely dramatic. One retired teacher put it this way: I spent 40 years looking at the same walls. I would rather be frightened on the road to Lhasa than bored in my living room. So when a van finally rolls into Lhasa, past the white walls of the old city, and its driver stands in the square in front of the Potala Palace, that massive red and white fortress rising 13 stories against the plateau's sky, something happens that has become a familiar scene. Grown men in their 60s and 70s quietly crying next to their dusty vehicles. Not because the palace is beautiful, although it is, but because of everything the road took to get there, and everything in their lives that told them they were too old to try. It isn't only retirees either. Coming the other direction, in cheaper vans with more stickers on them, is a younger wave. Office workers in their late 20s and 30s who walked away from the 996 schedule, the culture of working 9 in the morning to 9 at night 6 days a week. Some save for years to buy a second-hand van conversion. Many fund the road as they go, live streaming their cooking, their breakdowns, and their campsites to audiences of strangers, earning tips and sponsorships one short video at a time. On the road, the two generations keep meeting. At a campsite on the shore of Qinghai Lake, that vast saltwater lake sitting at 3,000 meters, you'll see a rooftop tent van covered in decals parked next to a retiree's tidy white motorhome. And by evening, the young couple is usually eating dinner at the older couple's fold-out table, trading route advice for hot pot. That, more than any single road, might be the real story here. China spent 40 years building at a pace no country in history has matched. High-speed rail, megacities, and along the way, almost as a side effect, the most extreme road network humans have ever constructed. Tunnels through hand-carved cliffs, highways held above deserts by irrigation lines, bridges like the Aizhai Suspension Bridge in Hunan, which hangs a 4-lane expressway across a canyon more than 300 meters above the valley floor. The roads were built for freight, for defense, for development. Nobody planned for what actually happened next, which is that the generation that did all that building would retire, look at those roads, and decide to live on them. And maybe that's the part worth sitting with, wherever you happen to be watching this from. Because the question these travelers answered belongs to anyone who has ever worked for decades and wondered what comes after. Every person eventually faces the same quiet moment Mr. Zhang faced in his apartment in Zhengzhou, the moment where the job is done, the kids are grown, and the years ahead are unwritten. Most people fill that moment with routine. Hundreds of thousands of people in China filled it with a steering wheel, a diesel heater, a bed behind the driver's seat, and a road that climbs into the clouds through 99 bends. As for Mr. Zhang, he and his wife finished Tianmen Mountain, crossed the Duku before it closed for winter, and were last parked on the edge of the Taklamakan Desert, planning their run at the G318 in spring. Asked when they planned to go home, he laughed, patted the side of the van, and said, "We are home. The apartment is just where the mail goes." If this story made you look at your own map a little differently, there's a lot more where it came from the sea-crossing bridges of the Chinese coast to the frozen highways of the far north, and each one has its own story of the people who built it and the people who live on it. Those journeys are coming next. For now, one question. If you could trade your front door for a windshield tomorrow, which of these roads would you drive first? Tell us in the comments. Safe travels, and we'll see you on the next one.